And we saw many of you here on Monday night for a presentation of what we had heard from last year's meeting and where we've been as a project, and we introduced some of the members of the project team. We have been working this week, meeting with community groups. We had a great open house last night for a couple hours, actually more than a couple hours, where people came in and had some discussions around the model and around those of us drawing. And we've come up with what we feel are some great ideas, and we're ready to show them to you. So let me introduce you to Paul Ostergaard from UDA, Urban Design Associates, who will take you through most of this, and some of us will join him.
Thank you, Scott, and good evening, everybody. There's a lot of information tonight that we want to share with you. I first want to thank the host of this space. This has just been a remarkable Charrette environment. All of the people who prepared food for us during the week and just made us feel so much at home here. It's really been one of the best Charrette venues that I've personally ever experienced. So the hospitality here has been terrific. Also, I want to thank all of you for your participation in the process during the week. Your input has been very valuable to us and helped guide us. And I hope that you'll see some of your ideas and thoughts reflected in the drawings that we're going to present tonight. This is a remarkable team. We went, it is of course Cornell University, and the developers are East Hill Village Partners, which include EDR, Leyland Alliance, and Charter. There are actually 5 design teams, not 2. So there's UDA and Whittam. UDA is my firm, Scott's with his last name's firm, Whittam. And then we have Studio Ma, Christian Moss is here. And we also have Perkins Eastman based in New York City. And we have Newman Architects, and they're based in Connecticut. And all 5 firms collaborated this week to develop ideas for this site. So you've had a lot of brain power looking at this. And I'm going to attempt to describe the many ideas that are represented in these drawings, and I'll probably not see all of them, or I'll just have oversight on some. So what did we do this week? Well, on Monday night, we presented the results of the analysis work that we had done, the results of the meeting we had last May, and we also proposed some design principles, which we asked you to discuss in roundtable discussions, and then you were able to present some of the ideas, additional ideas. So stick to the vision, it was one of the principles, and that is, this has always been viewed by the town of Ithaca as an important node in the town where there should be a higher level of development intensity. It's also it's adopted as part of their comprehensive plan. Pedestrians and bicycles are as important as cars, so a multimodal development. Beautiful open space, public open space, great variety is critical to the success of the project. This project, the development should welcome all people of Ithaca, and we want to connect this development to the region. We had a series of events during the week. As on Monday, we had the roundtable discussions, presentation roundtable discussions. And this is some of the things we heard on Monday that really were frequently mentioned, important topics. A lot of concern about traffic in this area as a result of this development. A great interest in incorporating bikeways and trails into the plan and connecting to the regional trail network, providing for childcare, perhaps a child care provider, but also child care provided by perhaps families who might be interested in watching children. Enable that to happen in the design. Look carefully at parking. Design a variety of green spaces. There's a lot of discussion about the scale of buildings. There's interest in housing for seniors, also housing for the middle class, and housing that is affordable to people on a variety of income levels. And then, of course, the last but not least, no fossil fuels in this development. So no coal, no gas. Look at new and alternative forms of energy. So on Wednesday night, a lot of you came in and just informally talked to the, that was last night, wasn't it? Talked to the design team, and we had a terrific turnout, and we played with the model, and you know, we heard in a lot of the meetings during the week some really strong ideas, which influenced our thinking as recently as last night and this morning. And you'll see a couple alternatives that came from you. And so today we worked frantically to refine the plan, to get it into the computer, to render it, and to prepare this presentation. And the presentation came out of the computer onto this one about 10 minutes ago. We have been studying the existing conditions of the site for a long time, and the study continues. And the team that's looking at the site has expanded. So we have a great engineering team on board now that's been looking at all of the utilities. We've been looking at the storm watersheds, strategies for managing stormwater, there's an old saying in the design world that form follows utilities. So we want to make sure the utilities are in the right place and that we have the proper services for this development. So this has been, there's been a lot of work on thinking about the site. So this is the survey, and it's the existing conditions drawing that we have been working from, and it shows the topography of the site. It shows the property designation, property ownership designations, the parking spaces, the building locations, utilities. Everything's on this drawing, so it's really been a great tool for us. So this is our initial draft plan. One option of it. And I'm just going to take you through this plan a little bit this evening. I'm going to just give you an overview with this image, and then we'll focus in on some of the areas. So one of the sort of heart of the plan is the shopping center with the existing grocery store, the restaurants and shops there. The Cornell offices are in blue. So this is the Cornell offices that are in that center, and then to the north, the Cornell office building is also in blue. The Sizer building is also a Cornell facility. We've colored that purple. So blue and purple are important facilities for the university. What we did was to propose new development, and mostly housing. And so we've proposed new housing along Ellis Hollow Road at the intersection with Pine Tree Road. We've really worked hard on improving Pine Tree Road all the way up to the limits of our site with new sidewalks, new street trees, new public spaces, safe crosswalks. We actually reorganized the parking a bit in the shopping center because we wanted to create a very generous green landscaped area here that could be used for events along Pine Tree Road. It would also help through the plantings conceal the views of the parking a bit and diminish their dominance. We proposed then also a connection through the shopping center. It would be a pedestrian way, perhaps a farmer's market shed here that would, where trucks could back up to it easily for farmer's market day. To the north of the site, we have the Agava restaurant, and we're recommending turning the front of the Agava restaurant into a beautiful public square, and they could have outdoor dining, of course, facing that square, and moving their parking behind and on street parking to enable us to have a really nice public space. There is a very important new road that we've created, this east-west road, and we're still trying to find a name for the road, so if you come up with any good ideas, please let us know. It terminates in this beautiful white oak tree that's on the site right now. This is a very important organizing element for the whole site. It connects both sides of Pine Tree Road together. It creates addresses for new residential development between the Sizer building and the existing Cornell office building. And it also creates an address for new residential development further to the east. We've moved the parking lot for the office building back here so that we're able to concentrate uses, a mix of uses close in to the middle of the development where it's friendly for pedestrians and easy to create a mixed-use environment. On the right here, we are illustrating how the existing Best Western Hotel could be redeveloped into two brand new hotels, about 85 rooms each, give or take, with new parking. So they would have state-of-the-art new hospitality facilities for East Hill. On the western side of Pine Tree Road, a new commercial use on the corner, and then perhaps a new restaurant along Pine Tree Road next to the square opposite Agava, and then new residential in the form of apartment buildings and townhouses. We're also looking at the idea of perhaps a child care center in this particular scheme. We've removed the Burger King. We have relocated the gas station to this spot on Mitchell Road here, and it is accessible from Pine Tree Road and from Mitchell Road to get to that new gas station facility. So let's zoom in a little bit on the plan so we can just see it in a little more detail. First, I want to talk about circulation. This diagram shows with yellow lines of varying widths pedestrian sidewalks and pedestrian connectivity. And our objective here is to create a network of streets and pedestrian paths that access all of the buildings. You can see that by creating a pedestrian path through the middle of the shopping center, we're able to make it much easier to walk from, say, the office building to the bagel shop, for instance. And so this new connectivity is really important, and it also connects to trails, the major trail network that would come up Pine Tree Road and connect over to the trails that head further south. We would propose trail extensions that come around into the site, and there are numerous other trail connection possibilities that we're kicking around. Also, sidewalk connections from Mitchell through the site to the shopping center. This is a very important route that we would consider for the development. You add to that the vehicular circulation that enhancements that we're making. We're creating this major new east-west street. We're creating improved connectivity through where the hotels are, connecting over to this street over here. So you have a network of streets now to make it easier to get around in. And improved intersections. We're hoping for, certainly this is an important signalized intersection. We're hoping for pedestrian activated signals at these two locations to make it safer for pedestrians to cross Pine Tree Road. So here are some of the places in the plan. Let's first focus on this area here. Just a little more detail. The grocery store, all those retailers remain. We have met a lot with the, sorry about the flipping here. We've met a lot with the existing retailers. Some of them want to expand and grow. So we're actually proposing some expansion on the center for some of the tenants. Of course, we're going to create a new pedestrian passage that goes through the center. So these, we've been talking with the grocery store, with the bagel store, with the fitness center, with the home furnishing store, with the antique store, and so on. So there's some really good retailers there. The building, this building will receive a facelift, and so will the Cornell offices building, so that it will be greatly improved. We also, as I mentioned, we've maintained the same number of cars, and actually, I think we've increased the number of cars here a bit for shoppers and certainly for the office workers. For the new residential area, there's a private residential lot just to the north of those buildings that's for the residents of that development. On the corner we have a restaurant, and this restaurant will share the spaces that are in the big parking field. And because it's a restaurant, it's very compatible with office uses and the ability to create a shared parking strategy, so that we don't have to build more parking than will really be necessary. The Urban Land Institute has developed methodologies and strategies that we're using here to judge the appropriate amount of parking to be built for this development. Up behind, this is an important parking reservoir for Cornell's offices. Of course, this is the car wash, which remains, and then this is the restaurant, Mirabada's, and their parking in the back. So this is a view looking up Pine Tree Road, and this shows the new housing on along Ellis Hollow Road that's set back about 30 or 40 feet off of Ellis Hollow Road, with front yard landscaping, and then a restaurant in the corner that might have second level dining with great views of the horse pastures and beautiful fields to the south. It creates a nice gateway. And then an interesting landscape that we think could be used, maybe even for gardens, for growing food, maybe for outdoor dining along Pine Tree Road on that side. On the left, a new commercial development. So we're creating here, I think, a much improved appearance to Pine Tree Road. And it's an important artery into Ithaca and the university and other neighborhoods to the north. This is a cross-section of the street to show it in a little more detail. And this particular cross-section is at the grocery store. If you recall, the grocery store has a beautiful blank wall that faces, it's not beautiful, it's a blank wall that faces the street. And we're proposing to do something in front of that I think is a lot of fun. There are 3 travel lanes in the street, a turning lane and 1 lane heading south, 1 heading north. And then we're proposing to integrate some on-street parking along Pine Tree Road to make it feel more like a main street, less like a highway. A big multi-use path on the western side that could be used by cyclists and by pedestrians. And we've even been looking at the idea of treating it so it could be used as a bridle path, so that horses from the south could go up the bridle path to the gorge and the whole landscape to the north and connect into that trail system. On the other side of the street, improved pedestrian access, and in this case, we're proposing some interesting food options with outdoor dining. This is a view looking the other direction. This is looking south on Pine Tree Road, and this is showing the street with the improved street with on-street parking, street trees and landscaping, a generous pedestrian path walkway, and then in here maybe a farm-to-table environment where you could have, you know how on TV you see those long tables where families have dinner out in a beautiful setting? I've never experienced that, but it seems that you must. So anyways, thinking of that concept perhaps in here related to the new restaurant that might be shown there in the background. So we're trying to really make this as an attractive an environment for pedestrians and as useful an environment as we can. This is our idea for the face of the PNC shopping supermarket. So these are shipping containers, and we're thinking of three 20-foot shipping containers at ground level, and they actually would be kitchens that would offer different variety of food. They're almost like permanent food trucks. And then we would put 40-foot long shipping containers on top of them, and spiral stairs or something heading up, so people could sit on an upper level. They could grab their food, sit on an upper level, and enjoy views from up high. We take another 40-foot shipping container and turn it on its end and create a campanile for East Hill Village. And maybe another shipping container around the corner on the blank wall of the supermarket, which could offer ice cream or some sort of tasty things. In the background, you see the Agava restaurant with its new dining facing this wonderful new public space that is now a parking lot. And that space could be used as a community green for concerts, for flea markets, for any number of activities. In this case, you're seeing it in the evening, used as a dining area, and perhaps there could be an evening concert. We're showing you the concept of maybe a little stage. And so we're animating this whole environment as much as we possibly can. And I will tell you that our development team is very excited by this idea and thinks that it could be a really interesting commercial form of development. We're also thinking of a farmers market pavilion here, and on farmers market day, the farm trucks could back up to this pavilion and here, and then they could have their wares out on this landscape right here and sell all sorts of interesting foods that are coming off the farm. This is just an idea. It's a placeholder right now because we really haven't had an opportunity to understand the farmers market operation thoroughly enough yet. But the idea, we wanted to get the idea down on a sheet of paper. The other thing that this pavilion does is it breaks up the parking lot so it doesn't look like you could land an airplane in it. So the office parking would be to the right, and the retailer parking would be to the left. And we would also, we're proposing, as you might guess, some trees in the parking lot to create shade and to shield cars from the sun and just make it a more attractive environment. Let's go north of the shopping center now. So we have a couple ideas for here. We have a new east-west street, which is very important. We've actually, because the survey has it labeled as Asphalt Drive, that's what we've been calling it, as Asphalt Drive. So we would love to get a new name for this street, and everyone is pleading with us to change it, but other people can weigh in on that. But the idea is that we have 4-story apartment buildings set back from the street quite a distance, about 20 or 30 feet from the street, up about 3 or 4 feet off the street with patios, and so the apartments here this would be an address for these apartments. Then we have this really cool idea that Christiana can describe in more detail a little later, of apartments that have views of the gorge and the beautiful landscape to the north, and they have these rain gardens and parking areas that are designed as courts in between. and perhaps even some real gardens for growing vegetables and so on could be integrated into this idea. And so what we're doing is arranging these buildings so that they relate to the beautiful views to the north. Also, these units will all get direct sunlight, which is terrific. And the parking then is, for all these units, is averaging about 1.1 cars per unit. The Sizer building stays, and that was a given. And over here, more apartments with parking behind that is not shown yet, but it will be separated from the office building parking. And then perhaps another residential building across the street. And this is that hotel, that new hotel that we looked at earlier. So this is a cross-section of that street. This is the Agava restaurant. We're looking west towards Pine Tree Road. The Agava restaurant, where they're parking, maybe a trellis system or something, then the street, which would have one lane each direction, on-street parking, and then a rain garden, and then a very generous sidewalk, terrace landscape up to the apartments, and these apartments might have outdoor patios. So that's one idea. Now, some people were concerned that these apartments were looking into the parking lots of Agava and Cornell. And if you go back to the plan, you can see that, yes, indeed, they would. They'd be looking at the car wash, they'd be looking at Agava and this parking lot too. So we tried another idea. What if we moved the street north a bit, scooched it north, created enough real estate here to put in 30-foot deep buildings that could have ground floor commercial uses, upper floor residence, apartments. Maybe they're walk-ups. Maybe these are live-work units, so you could actually have a small office in the ground floor. You could have a daycare in the ground floor that might be operated by the people who live upstairs. And so that way we control the view and environment of both sides of the street. This street is a very normal width that you find in America, building face to building face of about 75 feet. And it has on-street parking lanes going each direction. And so this is that section. This is the apartment building that you saw earlier, but not as much real estate in front of it. We have a 10-foot front yard, terraced area, sidewalk, tree planting, the street, tree planting, sidewalk, little storefronts. These could be little shops, little offices, and then upper floor apartments. And this is what it could possibly look like, which is a complete environment. It's with buildings on both sides, residential upstairs, and some commercial uses. About 7,000 to 8,000 square feet of commercial space in these buildings on the right. So this is an alternative we'd like you to think about this evening. Let's go to the west end of the plan. So the west end of the plan, we're showing here extending the road across into this area, and then the road comes down south and out onto Mitchell. This is the existing retention basin. We would create new townhouses in here. They could either be rental or for sale. I don't know that anyone's really decided that yet, but a new form of housing introduced into this development. And then some very nice apartment buildings, and these apartment buildings have great views of the beautiful cemetery surrounding it. We're showing the idea of a child care facility here with outdoor play yard that is actually very centrally located and easy to get to for motorists and to drop children off. And that's behind the Rite Aid drugstore. And this is the, this is the donut shop, the new restaurant here that is across the street from Agava. So it's a nice little precinct. The other thing that we're doing is that we're going to create a site for the gas station in this scheme, and this gas station will be down at Mitchell's street level, It's down about 8 feet from the streets to the north in the residential neighborhood. And then this could be a new commercial building. One idea is that this could be a medical, what do they call it here? Urgent care facility. Yeah. Apparently there isn't an urgent care facility in the area, so this might be a really welcome use for the area. An alternative arrangement would be to align the street so that it runs up along the cemetery, treat the cemetery almost as a public park, create a new beautiful fence and maybe a gate that leads into the cemetery, so that when you come into this development, you can, the whole neighborhood can actually share in the presence of the cemetery. And then it turns south, and we, in this case, we would screen this parking lot for the restaurant with residential townhomes. These townhomes would have individual garages and could be probably 3-story townhomes. And there are more townhomes here. Here we're showing an option where the child care facility might be somewhere else and the gas station might be somewhere else. So this is predominantly then a residential area with those uses located elsewhere. We're showing 2 ideas for locating a child care facility. You've seen this idea on the right, which is in that neighborhood in the West End, behind the Rite Aid Pharmacy, at the corner of these very nice streets. Another would be on the northwest corner of the site, above the Sizer building. And there's a couple interesting things about this location. The child care facility is next to nature, next to trails, and so children could go on hikes from here or walks without having to cross any streets to go on the trail system. It's also very visible on Pine Tree Road, and it is easy to get into and out of for drop off and pick up. It doesn't have traffic going into a neighborhood. So this is a very interesting option, we think, for locating this use. I'm going to invite Christiana, the architect, who will be working on the design of these buildings, to talk a little bit about the image and character and building typology.
There's some drawings of that right over here.
Oh, okay.
So
thank you, Paul. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about where the inspiration for the architectural character of East Hill Village will really draw its inspiration from. So the vernacular of buildings in Ithaca, both the kind of more agrarian functional buildings, the scale of buildings here, are things that really will inspire us, along with, I would say, nature. I spent 6 years in Ithaca as a student. I met my partner in life and work here. I've spent, oh sure, thank you. I spent years hiking in the gorges, swimming in its swimming holes, and skiing its backcountry, and really enjoying everything that it has to offer. So I would say that it's deeply important for, in terms of really where the buildings not only take their form from, but how they respond and interact with the natural setting. Paul made a reference to how many of the building forms that we have will actually draw nature in, and the gorges in, and the meadows that we have out there. So we really want to celebrate nature and have places for people to actually recreate and interact with the gorge setting that we have there. It's really beautiful. So that's one aspect of this. And then as materiality, we're looking for materials that actually relate to those kind of the vernacular buildings that we have here. Some utilitarian woods and metals that are simple and authentic. So we really want to come up with a truly authentic vision for this place. We really, I think our goal would be that you would see at the end of this project buildings that you wouldn't find anywhere else, that would be truly unique for this site and authentic. So that's about it in summary. So.
Thank you, Christiana. So let me just quickly describe our initial ideas for how this development might be phased. Phase one would concentrate our energies on the southern part of the site, fixing Pine Tree Road, developing the frontage along Ellis Hollow and Mitchell, relocating the gas station, looking at repairs and improvements to the shopping center and Cornell offices, building the farmers market, and building the new container dining facilities, improving the front of Agava to create the square. The owner of the hotel could also at this time consider redeveloping his property. And we would concentrate also working on the western side with the new housing and new townhouses over there, so that we're developing strong connections to Mitchell and really completing that part of the development area. The next phase would begin to develop north of the site, where we would relocate the parking for the office building to the east to create the space for a major new concentration of about 200 units up there. I neglected to mention, let me go back for a second, I apologize. This would be about 10,500 square feet of new commercial development, slightly over 200 apartments, and about 20 or so townhouses, a daycare center possibly if it's located there, and of course the hotels. In the second phase, we would add about another 200 to 210 additional apartments into the community in this phase. And then in the third phase, we would complete the circuit, developing on the northeast corner of the site about another 200 units up there. So in total, about 600 to 650 residential units is what we're imagining for this development. 2 new hotels with a combination of 160 rooms or so, and then of course the new commercial development as well. I'd like to invite Scott to present. Oh, Kate? Oh, great. Okay, Kate.
So, as has been said, our team has really been collaborating very intensely during this week, and it's been a great opportunity for landscape and architecture to inform each other. As Christiana and Paul have both talked about, the existing landscape has informed a lot of the views that are being borrowed by a lot of the buildings, and has informed how the circulation patterns around the site have been developed. So as we've been looking at the program for the site, we've developed a series of open space types ranging in their programmed use and planned activities, from the street to a plaza open space type, to lawn space, a productive garden where people might have the option to grow their own food, ornamental gardens, bioswales that would intercept the water from roofs and parking areas, bosques in a gridded tree arrangement, meadows, many of which are existing on the site, and the existing woods in the Cascadilla Creek corridor and in the cemetery and across the street from Mitchell Street. So these are visible and actively used by visitors and residents here. And speaking to that transect idea, ranging from more informal toward more programmed landscape, this idea of a range was developed, and how these areas might be applied throughout the site. Thinking about how food and farmscaping is such a big part of the culture in Ithaca, it's been one of the questions we've been talking about as we develop or think about the identity of the East Hill neighborhood, and how it's surrounded by the rural agrarian landscape, but food doesn't limit itself to the table is really the point. It's informed by pollination and the dining experience and the food and farmers that are all part of it. Recreation and nature, as Christiana has mentioned, the landscape that Ithaca is part of and where East Hill is creates a lot of opportunities for connection for people of all ages to interact with and have their own experiences. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. We don't know quite what's coming up next sometimes in the slideshow. Just to recap then, we're going to work hard on Pine Tree Road, create a better frontage with Ellis Hollow Road and Mitchell as well, make this a real focus for the new community. We're going to introduce a whole variety of interesting uses, as Kate just described, to animate the public realm, to create wonderful public spaces, both street spaces and other types of outdoor environments. We're going to bring some excitement to East Hill Village. We believe this could be a lot of fun for and unique in Ithaca as a major food destination with a variety of different new restaurants and food offerings. We're going to fix up the existing shopping center, make it exciting, and maybe create really pleasant residential neighborhoods with neighborhood services and a lot of conveniences in a very walkable and pleasant environment. So this is our plan. This is one of the options here. We're going to leave this up on the screen. We're now going to ask you to look at the plan on your table, consider what you've heard this evening, and discuss as a round table what you would like to do. Three things. What did you like about what you've seen tonight? What don't you like about what you've seen tonight? And what have we forgotten? What other ideas do you have that you didn't see in these drawings or that you would recommend? And then in about 30 minutes, we're going to ask each table to report out summarizing their discussion.
Excellent. Joe, how do I possibly know who's going to read?
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take the usual 20 minutes.
So it was 20 to 30, Joe.
20 to 30. Okay, so this table likes no fossil fuels. Trees. The urbanized, the effort to urbanize slow traffic on Pine Tree Road. We like the commercial / residential building idea for Asphalt Way. We like childcare in the northwest corner by the Sizer building. We think we like the assurance that the traffic flow from Ellis Hollow Road into Mitchell Road will remain constant. It will not be slowed. If, as I thought I saw a drawing that showed parallel parking on Ellis Hollow Road, no, that's a bad idea. Okay, good. We like the farmers market. We like the shipping containers along Pine Tree Road as shown, as depicted. We don't like parallel parking on Ellis Hollow Road if that's suggested. We question these metal appearing skins along some of the buildings as not necessarily fitting what's aesthetically pleasing. We don't think the vegetable garden as depicted is the right place for the vegetable garden. We would add solar on as many roofs and parking areas as possible, and then we would name Asphalt Way Solar Road or Solar Way. Okay. We suggest that the internal roads be permeable surfaces so the rain can be captured, and we encourage an expansion of the fitness center to add amenities. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
We like to be bioswales that were along the walkways and the roads. We were wondering how many people would be represented in the amount of townhouses and apartments that were in this facility. We were guessing maybe 1,200 people, and that kind of concerned us as far as the traffic going up and down Mitchell Street, Ellis Hollow Road, and Pine Tree. So traffic was still a concern for us. We hoped that the architects were remembering when they were talking about outdoor dining that it's kind of cold, gray, and rainy here in Ithaca for 6 to 7 months, 8 months, 9 months out of the year. Right. We liked and agreed that solar panels on many of the tops of the where the grocery store is and the Cornell building would be a good, great idea. In addition to thinking about maybe a green roof up there, because many of the residents in some of these buildings would be looking down on top of that roof. We liked the daycare center in the northeast section, both because of the access to the trails and because dropping off children, the traffic didn't go through a residential area. But of most concern to us was that your drawings are beautiful and shows lots of green space, but you neglected to put in the drawings all the telephone poles and wires that are all up and down Mitchell Street, Juddfall Road, and Ellis Hollow Road. It seems that within the area that's developed by the PNC now, the Rite Aid and Dunkin' Donuts, and over by the Cornell building, behind the Sizer building, those utilities now are underground. But there is a huge amount of wires and telephone poles, especially down what you're calling Asphalt Lane, which is behind, or closer to the PNC. And that was of great concern to us. And since you're redoing the roadways and the sidewalks, isn't phase 1 now the time to put those under the ground and maybe postpone phase 2 and phase 3 so that this village is a very attractive village without that? That was one of our primary concerns.
Thank you.
Two people from our group have left. So I will just mention these paintings because they reflect the character of the neighborhood surrounding East Hill Plaza that many of us would like to see reflected in the architecture and respect for the historicity of this area. So for example, these are all paintings by a regional artist living in the neighborhood, Brian Keeler. This is the view from Turkey Hill Road looking towards East Hill Plaza and Cornell and the Cornell Animal Hospital. And this area is a very rural area and the most agricultural oriented part of the Cornell campus is in the near vicinity of East Hill Plaza. So that's one aspect. Also, I will speak in favor of the community center, and that community center in some way reflect the historical nature of this area. A bunch of neighbors have saved 6 of the stained glass windows from one of the original churches, and my home was the original owner of my home, which is an 1865 Italianate building. That family dedicated one of those windows. About half of my neighbors have ponds. So it might be that there's a possibility of incorporating some water into this. You talked about some drainage area. Maybe it could be a beautiful pond. And there are a lot of historical buildings in this neighborhood, this being another one. Want to show it? I think also we like the idea of more restaurants and more active kinds of things to do, such as, as it is now, there's music sometimes at CTV as well as at Agava, and more restaurants really make this a place to go, a nice destination. And yeah, I think we would also applaud going solar on rooftops, and love the idea of putting the ugly utilities underground.
Thank you.
Without repeating as much as possible, lights, we like the pine tree, the green corridor on Pine Tree Road. We've renamed asphalt to Agava Road, and we liked it when it was shifted slightly northward to have housing on both sides. We do like the farmer's market idea. We think it should be wider, the cut through the building should be wider and have internal storefronts so that when people are walking through, they have storefronts on either side. In Fantasyland, it would create a straight line all the way through the greenery to East Hill Recway. We think there's an awful lot of parking in the northwest corner and would like to reduce that parking actually and have possibly car share apartments or some no parking to sort of reduce that a bit. And we know that this is probably a long shot, but we thought it made more sense to have in phase one that residential area along East Ellis Hollow to actually be the hotel and have the hotel space be more residential, keeping that residential area back from the busy roads. Let's see. Thought actually that, well, we liked the food truck idea, or the container. We thought it might make more sense on the north side of the PNC, so that when people are walking through the building, they come on the other side, as opposed to being just on along the busy road. Okay, yeah, personally, I slipped this in, dog park. We're wondering about moving the gas station in the middle of the residential area. We're not sure if that might be problematic as far as traffic flow. It's really the only gas station in the area, so that might cause problems. It might possibly be better sort of closer along Ellis Hollow Road. I'm not sure. We're also wondering about putting that gas station so close to the daycare, and maybe it might make more sense to keep that daycare near the Sizer building. What we would love to see, we'd love to see a vision of this as a sort of a town center in, say, 50 years when the larger flat buildings are gone. Like, what is the vision for that? How would that be incorporated? And we'd also like to know a bit more about the bus traffic flow.
But that's all.
Thank you.
As a table, we didn't get into specifics, but we addressed a lot where the table was kind of split. And with sensitivity to all kinds of people, those that have lived here for decades and that have seen the landscape change, it was very important that their voices be heard, and I truly understand that. One of the major concerns that we just debated was the density itself. And for those that have lived here, again, it seemed that it was tilted too far in terms of the density proposed. Specifically to that, the properties for the residences located on Ellis Hollow, not knowing the actual height of those buildings, if they were 3, 4, 5 stories, that there has to be some kind of thought and continuity given to the transition of that area. You have a beautiful horse pasture across the street, but to literally drive down Ellis Hollow or drive across Pine Tree and then to be confronted, which would be one word, with what might seem to be a very, visually stimulated entry point to the college property versus something that would maybe transition a little bit more easily. The other concerns regarding housing had to do, again, with density and the types of, and the number of units, and how many of those were going to be allocated for individuals of different income sectors. There were definitely voices that spoke highly of the potential for a lot of the different aspects of this, including the farmers market, for myself, childcare, and the designation of the walkways, which is important to people of all ages. But I always go back to whatever you're designing as a group, to think, as someone just said, beyond now, beyond 50 years, but think about the unexpected but possible. Thanks.
Well, let me take you through what we're talking about. We ended up, first of all, identifying very specific structures there in term and what we thought about. The Child Care Center, where it's currently located, doesn't make just was one of the first things we looked at and basically said it needs to, in effect, be much more central. It needs to be moved. We initially also thought in terms of, well, the suggestion that was made in terms of having it up by the research center made sense. And then we also looked at the other building there, which was the gas station, and said if we were to move the gas station, where we would move it, and said in terms of the flow of cars and so on, where that second location in terms of the child care center would make more sense for a gas station, and that we had to seriously think in terms of integrating child care much more into the physical spaces, the residential physical spaces that are there, and looking at it from that perspective. So that was one of the key things in terms of physically moving things. It's already been mentioned, and I'll just reinforce it in terms of putting another vote to it, is the notion of a community center. Where do people, is there a need for gathering in the future? Or are we all going to put on our virtual reality glasses and gather that way? I hope not, but who knows? The other thing is the incorporation of historic elements, that in effect this isn't just about dropping something new in place, but really also putting something in place that has history, and that in effect also drives history into the future. So that was another piece, and it was mentioned in terms of the stained glass windows, but there's many other ways in which that could play itself out. Another thing is just the whole notion of art. It was certainly from a music perspective, people have talked about it, but the notion of representation, in other words, in effect, if this is really going to be a village and not just a living place, it needs to be reflected in terms of the psychology of the space. And right now, the psychology of the space is what I would call glitzy, but not necessarily community. The other piece that's missing, and we understand it because we struggle with it in the larger Ithaca area, is this whole notion of clarity around public transportation. We need to get a handle on first-class transportation management, transportation demand management. And it really requires some thoughtful thinking and the right set of skills in order to play it. Interestingly enough, Cornell actually has probably some of the finest thinkers, probably less than a mile away from this project in terms of what it means to in fact create that. And then in effect make some recommendations. If a shuttle is a recommendation, what would it take? Can it be built into the cost of the cost of the apartments and so on? There's some interesting ways in which to deal with transportation, but it's not just a standalone column and a separate thing altogether. Our youngest member made it real clear that we ought to have playgrounds. And I was thinking that's actually, I also like to go to playgrounds. And the notion of, maybe it's a nature center or it's something that basically is a reflection in one place of our love and care of nature. We had a series of questions that we want to at least get out there. And that had to do with, which many of you were talking about, is the massing in regards to how do these things compare to the Maplewood buildings? You know, bottom line is we now know what a Maplewood building looks like and its massing, and can in effect project that into this space and say, okay, these are like these buildings here. And so that we have a sense for, you know, what the psychological sense for these buildings. We already talked about a shuttle. The other interesting question is, and I know if I were to put my developer hat on, when I would say this, what about like parking under buildings? In other words, let's reduce almost 50% of this 35 acres, at least visually appears like it's parking space. And so the question is, if you know, clearly it's going to cost more if you put parking underneath, but in effect what you'd end up doing is probably opening up a third of an acre that would truly become green space where people could sit and roll around with their dogs or whatever. The permeable pavement was already talked about. And I think overall, one of the critical things that we ended up asking is, how many people and over what time? For a couple of reasons, obviously. One is the mix of people. Is this going to be called East Hill Village, or is this going to be called East Hill College Town? The other key thing is, what will be the staging in terms of the commercial staging? We have X number of restaurants up there now, and when you start throwing in additional restaurants, you need to ask the question: is there the demand that in effect this place can generate? If indeed at the end of the game there's 2,000 additional people, give or take, over that period of time as they're moving in and getting settled and so on and stabilizing, it's very likely that the various restaurants and so on that are being discussed make sense as a driver. But it doesn't make sense to just throw them in there automatically day one. At least it needs to be tested to see whether or not it makes sense. Did I say it? Thank you. This is a historic statement. The street is going to be called Bowling Alley. There may be some of you here that remember that there was a bowling alley at the other end of it.
That's the best name so far. We're still looking for that competition. Yes, sir.
We have easily 25 sticky notes, maybe 35 sticky notes, and I won't bother to read them all to you. And a lot of the points that people have made, we discussed too. Some of the things that I think haven't been mentioned very much are, people talked about light pollution and dark sky compliance. People talked about runoff and permeable parking lots, permeable roads. I think we also thought that as you look at this diagram, it's a large parking lot, an awful lot of parking spaces, and is there a way to incentivize people not owning cars? Or we didn't think of putting parking lots, garages under the apartment buildings, but I think that might be another way to address that. We talked about there being too little green space, recreational space. People talked about a pond over here. I think that we would have liked that idea, but talk about volleyball courts or dog parks or something. We have parking spaces, but we don't have much green space. Another kind of point is if we're talking about a village, if we're talking about a community, it looks like a preponderance of apartment buildings which might cater to a transient population. And there are relatively few townhouses, and those are also rentals, of course. And so I happen to mention that living in a neighborhood, East Hill, Bell Sherman area, when there was talk of the library downtown being converted into another type of space, our neighborhood wanted it all to be condos, and we would have all moved into those condos, all being of a certain age and wanting to downsize. This village here has no room, as I see it, for home ownership or for condos. And it's all geared to a rental population. There was even talk at the beginning of whether you have to think that planners know these things, but what would the fire department say about this layout? Is there a place for fire trucks to turn around? I was once involved in a development project where it seemed like at least an acre of land was going to be taken up by a traffic circle so that the truck, given it a certain diameter, so fire trucks could get in and out. Maybe that's solved in this diagram. Other kinds of points from our table. Yes, there's fear that, let's say, the buildings, especially along Ellis Hollow Road, are going to be much too tall. And I think Scott William pointed out that there's always that tension between talking about density and not too dense, and building up and building out, that kind of thing.
Link this side now. Yes, sir.
My name is Todd Brewer. I'm the business manager for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers right here in Ithaca. I'm also the president of the Tompkins Portland Building Trades Council. So naturally, I want to see jobs be local, no matter who gets, as long as it's local people. There's a couple gentlemen here earlier.
Hold the mic a little closer.
A couple gentlemen here earlier talked about the driveway in front of the P&C stores, how dangerous that is coming in and out. Wonder if the entryway could be shifted. Just because everyone knows who drives in and out of there, the traffic's terrible right in that stretch, and it's pretty, it's dangerous, coming in on the intersection. And then we had another lady who was here earlier mentioned about on the east side of the Cornell building, where that little, where the road's gonna meet it, right by the big oak tree. They talk about there's a lot of water problems and concerns there with water. They were talking about the gas station too, about being in a residential area. That was another concern. But the main thing was that driveway in front of the P&C and the Cornell building.
So our concerns, we're focused not so much on the site itself, but on the larger area and the traffic situation. That there's concern that adequate attention be paid to all the comings and goings, the north-south traffic. We've got a couple here that's lived on Pine Tree for 40+ years, and they wanted to see the speed reduced from south of on Pine Tree south of Ellis Hollow down to 79. And all these restaurants are great. Everybody who lives close wants more choices there, but that's going to bring in a bunch of people, a lot more traffic coming from farther out, so some thought needs to go there. One question was, with all this parking there, you're going to have some pretty big piles of snow in the winter, a lot of big piles of snow. One other question was, we were wondering what's the, how does this time out in terms of the phases? When's groundbreaking? I mean, roughly speaking, groundbreaking. When's the end of the first phase? How many years is this going to go before it's done? Great, thanks.
Stack. I have an order.
I shouldn't have given it to you.
Okay, I'll try to be succinct. Our concern was that the size of the farmers market, we thought there should be more space for it in in that regard, it was also suggested that the farmer's market be placed on the east end of the parking lot on Pine Tree Road. It's the west end? That's the west end of, sorry, west end of the parking lot against Pine Tree Road might be a better site for that, but leave the covered space for bike parking. We like the idea of that walkway between the buildings having a cover over it, so it's a covered walkway. In glass or, okay, plexiglass? Or glass, whatever. Okay. We have a question, where is the focal point of the community when you think of this as a community? Is there a focal point? So most communities have a square or something, and sort of in that regard, where is going to be a spiritual space, a community space which would include a spiritual space for the community. And we also thought that that might well be attached to the child care center, because a community space could be a place where people in smaller abodes could have a larger potluck or community meeting. And if you have a potluck, you need a sink. If you have a daycare center, you have a sink. So it doesn't work to have a daycare center be the community center, because you can't move child care stuff aside and put people in easily. But you could share a sink. We do say, yeah, we also thought the child care should be north of Sizer. What the main thing was not next to the gas station. So if somebody thinks of a better place for the daycare center, that could be interesting too. We thought the playground should be more than a structure and a bigger space, with bigger green space. Another thought was the hotel housing. Boy, this is hard to use this thing. The hotel housing and swap the hotel and the housing unit such that the hotel is on Ellis Hollow Road next to the restaurant. We wanted to make the suggestion that there be a variety of tree types and possibly a variety of tree spacing, so that it doesn't look like, I don't know, some sort of a planned forest for wood cutting or something. The point was made that the building heights are all the same, and we need diversity, with possibly some even being taller. Anyway, diversity of heights. Our choice for the name for the asphalt row, choices of things we have here. Name of the farmer that used to farm that land, or the name of the first military tract owner.
Artificial Insemination Way.
They leased the land from Cornell, so he said artificial insemination way. That's, yeah. Okay. That was also, since you were focusing on the white oak, it could be Quercus alba. And the other thing was to call the road South Side, because the fields, when you get to the end, that field there is called by Farm Services, they call it South Side. And at the very last thing is just to point out, I like parking. I'm one of those, I know how to bike and stuff like that, but I tend to drive an F-250 because I have sheep. I'm lambing right now if anybody wants to see cute babies, I have lots of them. And I need a place to park so I can go to my favorite store, the P&C.
I guess I'm doing this. So a lot of it is very nice, but a village needs a heart, and there is no heart in this plan. I cannot understand why Cornell's office building right next to P&C is going to be retained, because it would be a perfect place to have farmers market, a community centre, and make a heart there for all the people that live there, and I think that would improve it immensely. Our table want to know what is meant by no fossil fuels, because we'd like to see no fossil fuels. Another point about fossil fuels is that in putting a gas station there, and my hope is that in 5 years we won't need gas. We'll be all driving electric cars. I think one should think about the future in that sense. I think the young gentleman who suggested a nice playground, I think that could go right with the community centre. I think that'd be great. What else do we have here? Daycare should be next to the CEFA building. It doesn't seem to fit where it's currently put. And we should be give careful consideration to the exterior of buildings to make them attractive. I think I'm done.
So our table had some concerns, and one of the concerns that we had was, it seems like the plan is very residentially dense, and we're concerned if there's enough parking for that. If there's not, we'd like to see parking, either a parking garage or parking underneath the buildings. If you look at the 3 buildings on the north side, there's no parking available for that. So we're concerned about the parking availability. Nothing was said about bus stops. Where is the buses going to be located and the locations for those? We were also concerned about the mixed-use sidewalks. So first of all, if you mix walkers with bikers, that can be a problem.
And horses.
But then if you throw in horses, that's a huge problem. So, and also, is there any kind of OSHA regulations with horses going along where outside eating is taking place and things like that? So, just some ideas there. We're also concerned about the size of the farmers market. I think right now there's like 15 to 25 vendors that currently participate in that farmers market. We don't think it's large enough currently in this plan. Some ideas we had. One of the things that we talked about was identical to yours. The central location of the Cornell offices. I know it was mentioned that you're going to beautify the front of that building, but that front of the building or the south side of that building is not used for anything. There's nothing there. It's just a wall. It would be great if the Cornell buildings could be combined. If you could take the central Cornell building and combine it with the tower somehow, put it in that north parking lot area, and use that space for more retail with residentials above the retail space, or utilize more of a green space, put in a central. Not doing anything, sorry. It would be, a central green space there would be nice. The other concerns or other ideas was, let's see, community playground. So that's another thing that was said earlier. I don't know, is there anything else that I'm missing from this table? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'll try and see this while I talk. So I'm going to start with the things that we liked for your enjoyment. We liked that there was integration of a daycare. We liked that there was a lot more housing. That's really important. We liked the farmers market. We liked the idea of having a concert space, the plaza in front of Agava. We liked of having the idea of a village feeling. We liked that it seemed like the place was going to be nicer, upscale, enriched, improved architecturally. There are some things that we had some issues with. The first was kind of Pine Tree Road. It's not seeming like the center of the village. It seems like a suburban parking lot. We're concerned about if there's enough traffic calming. We like that there's on-street parking, but we wonder, with so much parking for every single building, why would anybody park on the street when they have a parking lot adjacent to every door they might go into? We wanted to make sure that the space between the corner and the existing building gets activated, because it's important if you expect people to walk that they don't have hundreds of feet of empty space next to a parking lot. that they're going to walk next to. We had some questions about, who is this community for? Who lives here? What kind of units are there going to be? Is it all studios and one bedrooms? Are there places for families with kids? There's pluses and minuses of that. Are there going to be impacts on the schools? Those kinds of things. We felt like there was a lot of parking everywhere. I think I already mentioned that. But basically there's a view from every building of a parking lot. And that didn't feel a lot like a village to some of us. We liked the daycare moved by the Sizer building away from the gas station. We had some questions about if the gas station made sense to be, what direction is that? West of Pine Tree Road, and if it would make more sense to be east, closer to the hotels. We had questions about, are there options for depaving some of this parking that might only be used during certain seasons or peak periods of use, and could we do other things with parking space? We had questions about the hotels. They seem really separate from everything else, and with, again, views of a great parking lot, is there a way that they can be better integrated into some kind of a grid or community? We talked about the architecture. The examples of Ithaca's architecture didn't seem very much like Ithaca to us. They didn't have any historical relationship. I felt like they could have been anywhere, and that they were very modernist and may not be in style for very long. Other people's comments said they didn't feel home-like. The materials seemed cold. It didn't seem like, I've heard others say, a center of a community that was welcoming. We did like, again, that there is a lot of housing. We liked the option of having Asphalt Way, or whatever we're going to call it, have buildings on both sides. That's a really important part of a residential community, is having a residential building face another residential building. So those graphics, we liked the idea of looking out across the street that has buildings on both sides of it, and not views of parking lots. I think that's all our questions we have. Oh, and we liked the inclusion of convenient care. We had one gentleman who had to leave who had questions about, what services do we have? How does fire get here? How does an ambulance get here? Where do the buses go? Those kinds of things.
Thank you very, very much. These are great comments. They, as all the comments we've heard over the last few days, are really making us think as this moves forward in process. Vicki Taylor-Browse has captured everyone, as she did on Monday night when she copied every sticky that was left on all these tables with 140 people. And we have those as a team. Those will also be up on our website, easthillvillage.com. Is that it, Vicki? Right. So more information about the project as it develops will be up there. We'll continue to have meetings, continue to meet on transportation, on infrastructure, on sustainability as the weeks go, and we'll be back to talk about more at some point soon. Yes, sir.
Is there a target date to begin this process?
That's one of the conversations that we're in right now.
How's the conversation going?
pretty well as of tonight.
Can you repeat the question?
What our general schedule is, and that really is the conversation as we're talking about moving through a municipal process, moving through the design process. It's all, as you can imagine, for something as complex as this. How will it be phased? We're still even in that conversation. So,
but I mean, is it?
We'll have more information on that as it goes. But again, thank you very much. Thanks for taking your time on a Thursday night.